He is the kind of fugitive police officers whisper about. A man whose name still sends a chill through veteran investigators across Germany, Portugal, and Eastern Europe. For more than 2 decades, Volker Franz has remained one of Europe's most dangerous ghosts. A convicted murderer who didn't just escape prison once, but twice, slipping through the cracks of maximum security systems that were supposed to be impossible to break. In a continent known for some of the world's toughest law enforcement networks, Franz is the rare criminal who proved he could outthink, outmaneuver, and outweight everyone hunting him. His story isn't just about violence, it's about planning, precision, and a cold, ruthless intelligence that left investigators stunned every time they thought they had him cornered. How does a man serving a life sentence walk out of prison not once, but 2 times? How does he vanish in an age of satellites, biometric borders, and digital surveillance? And how has he managed to leave behind so few traces that BKA, Europol, and Interpol still classify him as extremely dangerous, with no confirmed sightings for years? This is the story of a killer who refused to accept captivity, a strategist who treated escape like an art form, and a fugitive who has forced Europe to confront a terrifying question. What if the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones we capture, but the ones we never find? Long before his name appeared on Interpol notices and the most urgent alerts of the BKA, Volker Franz grew up in an environment that revealed almost nothing about the violent and calculated fugitive he would later become. Born in 1970 in Germany, he was not the archetypal future criminal. No chaotic family background, no early immersion in the criminal underworld. What he did possess, however, was a combination far more dangerous: high intelligence, emotional detachment, and an early fascination with power. Teachers would later describe him as quiet, disciplined, and unusually strategic for his age, the kind of student who thought several moves ahead. But as he reached his late teens, that intelligence began merging with a growing disregard for rules and a fascination with firearms, control, and underground networks. Franz drifted into small-time crime, not out of desperation, but experimentation, trying to understand how systems could be manipulated, how people reacted under pressure, how to exert influence without drawing attention. Those early choices connected him with emerging criminal groups in reunited Germany, particularly gangs involved in arms trafficking, robbery, and black market operations. What stood out wasn't his aggression, but his precision. Franz didn't lash out impulsively. He planned, evaluated, and executed every step with calculation. He began developing a worldview anchored in self-reliance and dominance, convinced that institutions were obstacles, not authorities. This mindset hardened during the early 1990s, a turbulent period in Germany marked by shifting power structures and rising underground markets. Franz found himself drawn to circles where violence was a tool, not a liability, and loyalty was measured in utility, not emotion. It was in these years that he learned to handle weapons, study escape routes, and anticipate police reactions, skills that would later make him almost impossible to capture. Yet the most defining element of his origin was not the crimes he committed, but the cold, unwavering belief that he was smarter than everyone chasing him. That belief, once rooted deep enough, became the foundation of every decision he made. And soon, it would fuel the rise of a criminal career that pushed him from petty offenses into the realm of calculated murder, shifting the trajectory of his life and setting the stage for the violent ascent that turned him into one of Europe's most dangerous fugitives. As the criminal landscape of 1990s Germany shifted, Volker Franz saw an opportunity to evolve from a calculating small-time offender into a central figure within violent underground networks. The fall of the Iron Curtain had unleashed a chaotic flow of weapons, stolen goods, and emerging criminal alliances throughout Eastern and Central Europe. While many young criminals dove into this world with reckless ambition, Franz approached it with a strategist's mindset. He aligned himself with groups involved in arms trafficking, robbery, and financial crimes, quickly earning a reputation as someone who could plan operations with military-like precision. He was never the loudest, never the most visibly dominant, but he was the one others gravitated toward when they needed a plan that minimized risk and maximized control. His rise accelerated when he became associated with a gang focused on high-value robberies. Unlike impulsive criminals who relied on brute force, Franz built operations step by step: reconnaissance, timing, escape paths, weapon selection. But beneath this strategic veneer, something darker was taking shape. He began using violence not just as a tool, but as a calculated solution to obstacles. That shift became starkly visible in 1995, when a weapons deal spiraled into a deadly confrontation. Franz shot and killed a man during the dispute, a deliberate cold act that shocked even hardened criminals around him. This was no outburst. It was a decision made with full awareness of its consequences. From that moment, Franz crossed a threshold. Law enforcement no longer viewed him as a planner or accomplice, but as a dangerous, armed offender willing to kill without hesitation. The murder triggered an intense investigation by German authorities, who quickly identified Franz as the central suspect. Instead of retreating, he escalated. He participated in a violent armored car robbery that resulted in additional deaths, solidifying his reputation as someone who combined meticulous planning with lethal execution. Police surveillance intensified. His associates began turning on him. And as investigators closed in, Franz made a decision that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He would not surrender, he would not negotiate. He would disappear before anyone could put handcuffs on him. What he did next marked him as more than a criminal. It marked him as a fugitive who understood the weaknesses of the systems hunting him, setting the stage for a series of escapes that pushed him into the realm of European criminal legend. The moment that transformed Norman Volker Franz from a rising criminal into one of Europe's most feared fugitives came when German authorities finally closed in on him in 1996. After a string of violent robberies and multiple homicides, Franz was arrested and handed a life sentence, the harshest penalty available under German law. Investigators believed the story had reached its conclusion: the murders, the armed robberies, the cold calculations. Franz would spend the rest of his life behind concrete walls, monitored around the clock. But they underestimated the one element that had defined him from the beginning: an unshakable belief that no cage could hold him. Inside prison, Franz immediately began analyzing his environment the same way he planned his criminal operations. He observed guard routines, weak points in infrastructure, and the psychology of the people around him. To others, he appeared calm, resigned. In reality, he was constructing the blueprint for one of the most audacious escapes in German history. In March 1997, Franz put his plan into motion. Using a metal saw blade that investigators believe was smuggled in by an accomplice, he meticulously cut through the bars of his cell over several nights, disguising the marks with toothpaste and soap. When the moment arrived, he slipped through the opening, avoided surveillance points, and vanished into the night. The escape stunned German authorities. Maximum security prisoners did not simply walk out of their cells. But Franz wasn't finished. Freedom only emboldened him, and rather than disappear quietly, he returned to crime almost immediately. That summer, he led a series of violent robberies that left 2 bank employees dead, proving that his time behind bars had refined his ruthlessness rather than weakened it. In October 1998, investigators tracked him down again. Surrounded and outnumbered, Franz appeared to have no way out. He was returned to custody, but this time placed in a facility assumed to be escape-proof. Prison officials believed no one could escape twice. They were wrong. Only months later, Franz executed an escape even bolder than the first. Using homemade explosives crafted from smuggled materials, he detonated a charge that blew open a security door and sprinted through multiple layers of fencing before guards could react. In the chaos, he disappeared for the second time, leaving German authorities humiliated and the public stunned. With that second escape, Franz crossed from criminal into legend, a man capable of slipping through structures designed to contain the most dangerous offenders. And as Europe watched the story unfold with disbelief, one chilling realization spread among investigators. If he could escape twice from maximum security, what else was he capable of while on the run? That question would shape every step of the manhunt that followed. Once Norman Volker Franz escaped for the second time, he didn't simply run. He reshaped his entire existence into a life engineered for invisibility. Unlike cartel bosses who flaunted wealth or gang leaders who thrived on notoriety, Franz understood that survival depended on one principle: remain untraceable. His empire was not built through public displays of dominance, but through a network of small, disciplined alliances that allowed him to move across borders undetected. He relied heavily on connections he had forged in the 1990s with arms traffickers, smugglers, and Eastern European criminal groups. These networks provided him with what every fugitive needs: documents, weapons, shelter, and silence. Investigators believe Franz spent a significant time in Portugal, where he used false identities and lived within expatriate communities that asked few questions. Some reports suggest he worked in construction. Others say he used coded communication systems to coordinate with black market dealers. What made him so difficult to track was his ability to adapt. Franz avoided technology long before digital minimalism became common among criminals. No smartphones, no traceable bank accounts, no social media, just cash, burner phones, and face-to-face exchanges. His lifestyle was built around disappearing into ordinary environments, blending in so effectively that he could sit in a cafe beside someone watching his wanted poster without raising suspicion. Even more unsettling was his relationship with his wife, Manuela, who allegedly assisted him during periods of flight. Witness sightings in Portugal described a couple who looked like tourists, living quietly near the beach, moving every few months without alerting landlords or neighbors. Franz's ability to maintain a stable cover without slipping into recklessness suggested a level of discipline unmatched by most fugitives. But being invisible did not mean being inactive. Authorities across Europe linked him to several money-moving operations and suspected he may have cooperated with groups involved in cross-border trafficking. None of it was provable, but that ambiguity only deepened his legend. His so-called empire was built on secrets. He never stayed in one place long enough to form patterns, never trusted anyone enough to expose himself, and never repeated methods that worked. Every move felt like a new strategy. As the years passed, investigators grew increasingly frustrated. Surveillance technology improved, borders tightened, databases expanded, yet Franz remained absent from all of them. Not a single verified photo, fingerprint, or digital signature emerged. It was as if he had hollowed himself out of the modern world, and with each year he stayed hidden. One question grew louder within European law enforcement. Had Franz built a life so perfectly invisible that no state, no agency, no system could ever track him again? That question would become the driving force behind the final phase of the search, a pursuit that still has no definitive ending. For most fugitives, time works against them. They age, they grow careless, they resurface in predictable patterns. But for Norman Volker Franz, time became his greatest ally. Every year he remained at large strengthened the myth around him and weakened the expectations of those hunting him. The BKA, Europol, and Interpol all maintained active files on him. Yet the silence surrounding his whereabouts grew heavier. No confirmed sightings, no arrests, no fingerprints, no digital trail. It was as if he had dissolved into Europe's underbelly. Investigators believe Franz continued using multiple identities, rotating between forged passports and local alias documents that kept him ahead of border checks. His last credible appearance was in Portugal, where authorities launched coordinated raids across Coimbra, Aveiro, and several coastal towns. Each raid came too late. Franz had already vanished. Portuguese police described him as a ghost who knew we were coming, raising speculation that he might have received advance warnings from criminal associates or corrupt intermediaries. Rumors placed him in Spain, France, Poland, and even South Africa, but none were verified. The mystery deepened further when former associates in Eastern Europe claimed Franz had undergone changes in appearance, speaking multiple languages with convincing fluency. Some said he lived off small, low-risk income streams. Others believed he continued advising criminal groups from the shadows. What united all these theories was a chilling consistency. Nobody could confirm anything. Law enforcement analysts often debate whether Franz is still alive. Statistically, long-term fugitives either get caught or make a fatal mistake. But Franz always operated differently, hyper-disciplined, cautious, and unemotional. There were no drunken slip-ups, no contact with friends or family, no financial signatures. If he is alive, he has likely mastered the art of staying invisible in an era defined by surveillance. If he is dead, he may have orchestrated a disappearance so thorough that no trace would ever surface. The BKA continues to list him as extremely dangerous, emphasizing his history of calculated violence and precision escapes. To this day, his profile occupies a unique space in European criminal history. A man who killed without hesitation, escaped confinement twice, and evaded one of the world's most advanced law enforcement networks for more than 2 decades. Franz's downfall, if it ever comes, may not be the result of police work, but of time, age, illness, or the slow erosion of the networks that once protected him. Until then, he remains one of Europe's most enduring mysteries. A fugitive who didn't just run from the law, but outsmarted it so completely that the world is still asking the same unsettling question. How do you capture a man who learned to live where no system can find him? In the end, the story of Norman Volker Franz is not defined by the crimes he committed, but by the terrifying simplicity of the question he left behind. How can a man disappear so completely in a world built on surveillance? His escapes shattered the confidence of high-security prisons. His years on the run exposed the limits of Europe's most sophisticated intelligence networks. And his silence, the total absence of mistakes, sightings, or digital traces, became its own kind of message. A reminder that some fugitives survive not because they are lucky, but because they are disciplined enough to vanish on their own terms. To investigators, Franz represents unfinished business. To the public, he is a ghost whose legend grows every year he remains at large. And to those who study the world's most elusive criminals, he is the ultimate outlier. A man who refused to surrender, refused to fade, and may still be walking somewhere today under a name no one recognizes. Whether he is alive, hiding, or long gone, the impact of his story remains. Franz forces us to confront a disturbing possibility that even in an age of biometric borders, global databases, and constant monitoring, a single, determined individual can still slip through the cracks and never be found again. And that is why his name continues to echo across Europe. The fugitive who proved that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones we never catch.